Okay, so here's something that is, well, it's pretty wild when you stop and think about it. The simple act of trying to find a purely spiritual messenger, a concept like an angel, that one challenge actually forced Western philosophers to rethink the entire structure of reality. And that's the intellectual chain reaction we're tracing today. We're using Mortimer Adler's 1952 essay on the subject. It's part of the famous Great Ideas Project. We're going to synthesize how thinkers from Homer through the Middle Ages and all the way to Freud really battled with this idea. Here are the most game-changing insights from the essay, Practical Wisdom That Could Transform How You Think and Act.
Right, and it's so important to frame this correctly from the start. We are examining this purely as an intellectual category. Think of it as a placeholder for a specific type of being. The question really is, what's the minimum definition you need for a non-material entity to even exist? So this isn't about faith, it's a huge philosophical puzzle. And for a deeper, more dynamic analysis of this essay, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM.
So let's start with that first big insight, the radical shift in definition. If you go back to the earliest sources, say Homer, the figures playing this messenger role, they were embodied. They had bodies. They're almost like minor gods or just very powerful physical agents who could, fight and eat and actually show up.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is contrasting that with the move made by Christian scholastics, thinkers like Aquinas. They made a truly revolutionary move. They redefined the angel as a purely spiritual substance, an intellect with no body. And the reason was, well, it was a kind of philosophical necessity. If this being had any matter, that might imply it was imperfect, or that it could detract from God's unique status as the supreme spirit. This move forced them to create a whole new category for, well, superhuman persons, beings greater than us, but absolutely less than the divine.
Well, wait, hang on. If they're a purely spiritual substance, Adler must have spent ages on how they actually do their job, right? How does a being without matter move?
No, or talk. That is the exact question that occupied medieval thinkers for centuries. Their answer was that these beings communicate through basically instantaneous knowledge transfer, and they move by just instantaneously willing themselves to be in a new location. So they're defined by what they lack, but somehow their role, their job stays the same.
And that's insight number 2. It doesn't matter if they were Homer's physical messengers or Aquinas' pure intelligences. Their role was always consistent. They're always the intermediary, the one mediating revelation, bringing insight, bridging that gap between the divine and the human. The definition of the being changes completely, but the job description, it holds fast.
And that functional consistency is what led to the most intense debates, which brings us to our third insight. Do these beings have free will? This question was absolutely pivotal, because if they don't have free will, they're basically just complex divine instruments. They perform tasks perfectly, but they have zero moral responsibility.
You mean like a super complex calculator?
Precisely. You wouldn't get angry or assign moral blame to a calculator if it broke, would you?
No, of course not.
So the scholastics needed to prove these spiritual beings are more than that. If they had free will, then they were morally responsible. And you need that to explain cosmic evil or the idea of fallen beings within that whole framework. Everything hangs on that one question.
That idea of moral responsibility is definitely something to chew on. And if you find this kind of intellectual synthesis valuable, check out Mindful Moments. It's our YouTube channel offering AI analysis, summaries, and critiques, all meant to inspire reflection and rational thought. Okay, so now let's move forward in time. We get to the Enlightenment, thinkers like Francis Bacon, John Locke. And this is where the demotion begins.
Yes, but the challenge wasn't really a theological denial. It was epistemological, which is to say, they challenged how we know something is real. Modern thinkers started demanding rational justification, empirical proof that our senses could actually confirm.
So the Enlightenment just decided the concept was too messy and, threw it out. That feels a little dismissive for something that grounded centuries of thought.
It was more of a practical dismissal, I'd say. The medieval definitions just couldn't meet this new standard of scientific proof. So the concept got relegated to allegory, maybe a storytelling device. It just wasn't necessary anymore to explain how the universe worked.
But Adler shows the idea didn't just vanish. It moved.
Yeah.
And to complete the arc, we have to look at modern figures like Freud or Jung. They basically moved the messenger from out there in the world to inside our own heads.
Absolutely. The idea stops being about a literal external entity and it starts functioning as a projection of our inner world. Maybe it's an archetype or it represents the superego or even the highest potential of the human self. It just shows that persistent human need for that go-between function, even if we place it inside our own minds.
Which brings us to the final takeaway. Adler shows the angel functions as this crucial boundary marker in Western thought. It constantly forces thinkers to confront the limits between the physical and the non-physical. It tells you far more about how the thinker viewed the universe than about the being itself. If you define it as physical, you live in one kind of universe. If it's pure intellect, you live in a totally different one.
I think that persistence, from demigods who could literally wrestle you, to pure bodiless intellects all the way to inner archetypes, it really does suggest a deep-seated human need for mediation. We seem to require a category to fill that space, bridging the material and the holy divine.
We've only scratched the surface of how this idea really works as a conceptual lever. If you want the full breakdown of Adler's argument, click the link on the screen for the in-depth summary of this essay. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally. See the many genre-based podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.